Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the tank review of the ZTZ99. Rank 7, battle rating 10.7, new top end of the line Chinese main battle tank. And to be honest, it's a good looking one. I really like it, and to add to it the camouflage really makes it spicy. However, there is one big problem that I need to address with this tank right away, or rather two. Before we go into the pure objective look at this tank with a statistical comparison and some gameplay in the background, as well as an armor analysis as you're used to from my proper tank reviews. That's the first problem. It's the only rank 7 tank, and for an entire battle rating there is, technically speaking, nothing to support it. And there is also no SPA, so the WZ305, as cool as it is to snipe planes with proximity fused shells, it's not really up to top tier standards, right? So there is not much to support it, and artificially up tiering a tank for over an entire battle rating still doesn't make for a complete lineup. That's an issue. Not the tank's fault, but something that also affects it a bit. Second aspect is the new update in combination with the Warbond Marathon, and on top of this Operation Winter, makes for not such a great experience with all the bugs and also the player base going nuts. So again, not really the tank's fault, but affecting the experience in it. Is this tank worth it? To be honest, to make it very brief and short, not really. But again, not really the tank's fault for one half of the judgment. For the other one, it is the tank's fault. And what that means, I shall explain to you in a full tank review. So let's see what this tank is all about. I want to begin with the armor. Let's begin with the hull from the bottom to the top. We begin with the lower frontal glazes. 80mm of cast homogeneous armor at 55 degrees angling, and that means that's practically paper for top tier. And every shell type will go through, including HESH and heat. So there is no composite armor and there is no ear protection either. It's roughly a third of the frontal profile area of the tank, so it's a huge weak spot and you should cover it at any cost. Then we come to the upper frontal glazes, and it is significantly better protected, not just because there are the FY4 era blocks and also composite armor together. That means that it is really strange, this frontal plate, because it is very random. There are sections that can be easily penetrated, but then there are also sections where even the DM53 from the Leo 2A6, and therefore also the CL round for one of the Swedish and 3 of the Italian top tier tanks, won't pen. In general, it has to do with the era blocks. I'm not completely informed on what kind of era this is, how much it affects it, but by test shooting I figured out that basically when I get shot it pens. When I shoot somebody in this tank, it doesn't pen. It's really random. And in general, the first bottom 2 rows you shouldn't shoot, but here the upper row can be a bit easier pen. You can see that even the era blocks are a bit wedge shaped, and that is then therefore the area where you can pen easier. Then we have to also go directly to the turret area and the weak spots. Now, I've discussed already the lower glazes, but then we also have, in typical Soviet/Russian fashion, a massive traverse hatch, a huge turret ring area, and the gun breech area is also a third of the turret face area, which is massive and easy to hit. So you have the usual top tier weak spots and the lower glazes. Let's talk about the sides. Well, one further thing about the turret. The cheeks are also really tough, not just because of the era, but they will absorb any sort of APFSDS round. So if we then go to the side behind the rubber fabric that will prematurely detonate HESH and also HE rounds, we have a mere 50 millimeters of effective armor, and on the rear it's 45, and the engine deck plating is as low as 5 millimeters and 20 millimeters, so that is weakly protected. The turret side is also here a bit the composite area and a bit of angling, but for the side you can see, if we go to the X-ray, not that much of resistance except for heat warheads. And we can see that in the back of the turret there is no ammunition, but we have the usual huge Soviet style ammunition carousel, and also out of the 3 crew members, 2 are in the turret, so for a side shot it's almost impossible to not kill this tank if you just shoot in the side of the turret or below the turret. And even if you take huge amounts of ammunition out, that won't really save you. So the survivability, the armor protection, those are definitely not the tank's strength. Let's move on to some other aspects to see what the tank then has going for it instead. I want to begin the statistical comparison with the mobility, and there we can see that the tank is a bit of an up and down. The ZTZ has in this comparison the worst horsepower, but it's also on the lighter end of the weight. So 1200 strong engine for a 51.0 ton tank, giving it 23.5 horsepower per ton ratio. And that is, in this comparison versus especially the Western MBTs, the second worst, only beating the Challenger 2F. The top speed with 65 kilometers per hour is not really bad, but also only beating the Challenger 2F while being on par with the Ariete PSO. What is outstandingly objectively bad and absolutely awful is minus 5 kilometers per hour reverse, and that in combination with no neutral steering. However, the tank again has some funny modifiers, it seems, to the friction of the tracks. So it is basically a tank that slides all over the place if you want to take a corner, but then it just won't accelerate, and then it just doesn't want to turn. And so that means, especially for example on medium terrain, especially over sand, it is noticeable that the tank just goes at nearly the full speed, 60 kilometers per hour across the dunes of the sands of Sinai is no problem. But then it just doesn't want to turn in a city fight. So this tank is a bit awkward. It's not outstandingly awkward, but if you're used to Soviet/Russian tanks, you know what I'm talking about. And that puts the tank in a not so favorable position when it comes to racing for the caps and capping, and also racing for positions before the enemy can cross a certain area where then you can ambush them in time. That is not so possible with this tank, especially when it's stock. Now let's talk about the business end of the tank and its overall gun handling. So the ZTZ has a 125mm ZTZ99 gun with an overall ammunition capacity of 39 rounds. The reload is 7.5 seconds for an autoloader. And that is a bit of a bad story, especially early game when everybody is at full capacity. And you can see the THU also has an autoloader, but it's only 6.5 second reload, and the rest of, especially the Western MBTs, have between somewhere 6 and 5 seconds reload. In the case, for example, of the T90 or Type 90, which I have not listed here, the Japanese manned battle tank, it has a 5-second reload autoloader, so you can see that 7.5 seconds is quite a bit. If you lose a crew member though, only one, and you're down to 2, then you still have the 7.5 seconds, and you also reload, for example, while you extinguish a fire, which all the other Western MBTs, again with the exception of the Type 90, just don't. However, the difference is mostly noticeable, and obviously the comparison is here for ace crew qualification, which again is then an advantage of the autoloader because you don't need it, because it's independent from the crew skills. Then the turret rotation speed with 30 degrees per second is acceptable, but again not the very best, which would be 40 degrees for the majority of Western MBTs. The gun depression, and here I have made a little bit of a mistake with the color coding, is the joint worst with only -5 degrees, and this it shares with the T8U. Again, in typical Soviet/Russian fashion, you can't really work ridgelines this well, especially in conjunction with the very bad reverse gear. Outstandingly bad is then the gun elevation, so you have a fair share of problems shooting at tanks that are above you, or then also helicopters. And also, even if you have the gun elevation, you have one of the worst elevation speeds with only 6 degrees per second, and sometimes you really feel this. Now, there is one thing that the tank is also capable of, and that is thermal imaging, not just for the gunner but also the commander, and that also in very crystal clear third generation quality. So that is then the only advantage, I'd say, although that is now more or less gold standard for top tier tanks. So the tank is also in the gun handling department not really convincing. Let's talk about the ammunition. And sadly, this tank is no exception for the top tier stock heat curse. The DTP125 sounds almost like a Western MBT stock heat defense round with 480 millimeters of penetration at any distance. However, the muzzle velocity is a bit lower with only 905 meters per second. I don't want to go into too many details what heat does, but basically it is inferior to the darts. And that brings us then to the second stock shell, which is the DTB125 with a muzzle velocity of 850 meters per second and 45 millimeters of penetration. It is also really funny to blow up enemy SPAA or to shot trap enemy main battle tanks. That is probably the best part about this tank, this kind of meme shell. It's not a hyper meme shell, it doesn't work versus every MBT, but when it does, it's actually fun. And so as a backup second stock shell, it eases a bit the pain before we get to the first upgrade for tier 1, which is the 125i APFSDS round. It has a muzzle velocity of 1730 meters per second, and with the high muzzle velocity in conjunction with the very good laser rangefinder, the magnification, and as I said, the very crystal clear third generation thermal imaging, it is really easy to use this tank as a sniper. With 466 millimeters of penetration at 0 degrees angles of attack, and 269 millimeters at 60 degrees angles of attack, it is roughly in the region of the L26 APFSDS round for the British, and not that much worse than the DM33 fired from the 120 millimeter L44. However, it already beats the best shell that the T8U gets, and as well as the STRV122B PLSS. Is, as I said, not that far off. So that is the tier 1 APFSDS round. It's not low pen enough for you? Well, I got you covered with the tier 4 APFSDS round, which is the DTW125 APFSDS round. We have the same muzzle velocity of 1730 meters per second, but improved penetration of 568 millimeters at 0 degrees angles of attack, and at 60 degrees we go up to 328 millimeters. Now, it is obviously clear that this is not the best round in the game, but also not the worst top tier round in the game, and I think that puts it into perspective what the tank overall stands for. It's overall capable, it's decent, it's nice, it does the job, but it is not the best at what it is. So it is you to judge what you think about this tank, and that is it now with the comparison. Let's come to a verdict for this tank. So while currently the events coming all together, like the Battle Pass grinding marathon as well as the winter or Operation Winter, together with all the features of the new patch like, you know, bugs etc., are not the tank's fault, as well as that there are no other Chinese top-tier vehicles to support it, such as an SPA, for example, or a light tank. It is what it is, a standalone tank, and it's not really outstanding in its performance. So objectively speaking, there are not that many reasons to play it. If you just main the Chinese tech tree and for some bizarre reason you really like the tank or think it is the best that it is, it gets the job done. There is nothing really wrong with it. However, it is just not very competitive in the Western MBT meta, and that makes the tank for me personally a bit irrelevant. Not bad, but irrelevant, if you know what I mean. And I think that's all that you need to know about this tank, the ZTZ99. Good looking, but a bit pointless. More or less like the new update, right? So that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this quick tank review. If you enjoyed it, why not give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more. Let me know in the comment section what you liked about this presentation, and also if you realize that this is in 4K resolution for your pleasure. And as usual, we will see each other on the waves in the skies and on the battlefields of War Thunder.